Well, hello there. It is the Style Sessions, and I'm Roger Mittag. Welcome back. For those of you who've been following the Style Sessions on our Prud'homme YouTube channel, I welcome you back. For those of you who are new, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Make sure that you like our channel, that you tell other people about it, what we're doing. The Style Sessions are really about exploring a variety of what I would call more traditional beer styles. Oh, and by the way, I'm Roger Mittag. I'm the host of the Style Sessions. I'm also the founder of Prud'homme Beer Certification, which is Canada's beer certification program. We run classes online. We run classes in classrooms when we're allowed to. We've got some in BC, some in Alberta. Hello, Daniel James. Hello, Harold. Always welcome, Harold. He's a great follower. And Daniel's my son, my eldest son. So it's always nice to have him here as well. We run classes in when time permits and when life permits. We run classes in British Columbia, in Calgary, in Toronto, the GTA, Ottawa, hopefully Montreal soon. We're in discussions with someone to license our program in Quebec, which is a huge thing for us. And Nova Scotia with the Nova Scotia Community College. Hello, Joe. Hello, Craig. John, you're back. Very nice. I really doubt that you're the better behaved twin brother. I'm not so sure about that. For those of you who are signing in, that's great. I always love the commentary and the discussions that we have. For those of you who are just watching for the pure entertainment value, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Hello, Anne. I happen to know Anne. We've got some really cool beers to talk about tonight, and looking forward to the next little while. And Marisa's back. Hello, Marisa. So it's should be tons of fun tonight. I have some good stories for you, and some good tasting notes. We're trying 2 different beers tonight. Hello, Bess. Good evening to you as well. We are going to explore the category of American Pale Ales, which is vastly different than British Pale Ales, also known as bitters, which I'll talk a little bit about in a sec, but we're going to explore the one beer that really created or solidified this style, and then a beer that's closer to home, local, that took its inspiration from the first beer. And so we always start off with pouring a beer, because I know that everybody enjoys having a good beer while we have a good discussion. So I'm going to start with Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. So I'll give you a bit of background on Sierra Nevada as I'm pouring it, and then we can talk a little bit about the characteristics that are in this particular beer. This is the glass I'm choosing for tonight. I like this glass for Sierra Nevada for lots of reasons, but I think for me, what it does is it helps to bring out the caramel and the malt characteristics of this particular beer. This is, you can see what a beautiful color it is. It's really that nice tangerine, almost burnt orange color to it. It's almost like a sunset on a California coast, which is not quite where Sierra Nevada is, but it's got a slightly off-white foam to it. The interesting thing about Sierra Nevada is the nuances that we would expect out of an American Pale Ale aren't as prevalent as they would be in others that are more modern now. So really light hints of pink grapefruit skin, just a touch of pine. But I think the thing that I like about this is it's probably closer to a British Pale Ale than what we would see as an American Pale Ale at this time. But this is really the grandfather of all the American Pale Ales, and it's so good. Yeah, that's great. A little bit of pine, more of the pink grapefruit, a little bit more of the caramel, some dark bread notes in there, a little bit of tea, slightly floral characteristics as well. I'm picking up a little bit of almost carnation, oregano, and maybe a touch of lavender, just a real small hint. So now that we have this thing open, we might as well talk a little bit about it. I haven't had that in a long time. It's just always, it's one of my favorites. One of my instructors, Doug Appledorn, I remember a long time ago when he was doing his level 3 class, did an entire beer dinner program around Sierra Nevada. So he had it for every course and he featured it for different reasons. So it's always been a really, really good beer. One of the favorites of mine, American beers. But it's a really interesting beer. So let's go back in time. So first of all, let's go to British Pale Ales. So these were basically created in around Burton-upon-Trent or even London, England, 1700s. Hello, Steve Booth. Welcome. And if you sort of take a grasp on how the British name their styles, it's really about comparisons. And British pale ales at that time were called pale because they were paler than the traditional brown beer, so brown ales, porters, and stouts. And British brewers had started inventing a new heating technique using coke, which is coal, but at much gentler temperatures. And so they were able, when they were roasting their malts, to come up with these lightly roasted malts that created these beautiful amber colors in their beers. And so they named them pale ales, but they were also named bitters because they were more bitter than a British mild. So you can see that everything's really a comparison. Now, the big thing with British pale ales is if we look at beer styles as being like movies, then malt is really the critical star of a British pale ale. It's really all about the bready characteristics, the caramel, the toffee, the whole grain breads. Anything that is malt derivative is really the star of the British Pale Ale. So they became very, very renowned and then became India Pale Ales as well. Welcome, Maureen. This is great. Maureen's joining us for the first time. Dave's usually a big beer fan, but he's subtly in a meeting. Pete Rainan's back, which is really nice. Welcome to all of you. So these British Pale Ales eventually evolved into IPAs. So what we know is that these beer styles became out of fashion. A lot of it had to do with the advent of Pilsners, and people were thirsting for more easy drinking beers, something that was lighter, easier to drink, that they could drink quite a bit of. And so the desire for pale ales or bitters outside of Britain really waned. And so now we move into the 20th century, 21st century, into the 1900s, and we see that in the early 1970s, Jimmy Carter abolished a lot of laws and allowed for home brewing to start up again, and for craft brewing really started up. So 1976, a gentleman named Jack McAuliffe started the New Albion Brewing Company in California, and is credited with being the very first craft brewery in the United States. Now, sadly, New Albion only lasted about 6 years, but at that time, they started a whole new concept of being craft brewers. And in 1979, a gentleman named Ken Grossman started discussions with his partner on starting a brewery in Chico, California, which is northeast of San Francisco. And Chico was where we saw those devastating fires last year. And so our hearts go out to all the people still recovering from those fires. Good thing was that Sierra Nevada wasn't touched; it was left intact. So, 1979 they start the discussions, and in 1980 they actually open Sierra Nevada, and Sierra Nevada Pale Ale became their first beer in 1981. This really started a revolution in brewing. So people started looking at these new styles of beers as being the next generation of pale ales. And in the American version of a pale ale, hops are the star. And not really in California, but in Washington and Oregon, especially in Washington, they found this wonderful hop that was growing in the Yakima Valley, and it was called Cascade. And Cascade has notes of pine and grapefruit in it, and it became the major star of the American brewing industry, and to this day remains the #1 hop grown in the United States. It's also surging in other countries as well. So it really is a very dominant aromatic hop. It's got some wonderful characteristics to it. So Sierra Nevada moves on and started a second brewery in North Carolina probably about 10 years ago. And state-of-the-art breweries, both of these. The interesting thing about Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is if you read the can, it actually says that it's can conditioned. So it doesn't mean that it's re-fermented because you can't really add yeast back into a can. It's not going to do well. It's going to create too much CO2 and possibly blow up. But it does mean that they really haven't filtered things out, so they've left some of the existing yeast in there. It is quite a clear beer for a beer that's been can conditioned, and it's got some incredible flavors. But this is really a unique brewery. It's the 7th largest brewery in the United States right now, and I believe the 3rd largest independently owned craft brewery, right behind Boston Beer Company and Yuengling. So one of the big things in the U.S., and quite a few of the breweries have done this, is build breweries on the opposite coast. So Sierra Nevada, being in Chico, built a brewery in North Carolina. And a lot of this is not just simply because they want to capture market space, but it is for distribution because they know that their beers really don't travel well across that big country. And by having a brewery in North Carolina, you can really satisfy half of the country from that side of it. I will show the can again. Yeah, this is Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. You can find this in Ontario in the LCBOs. You can pretty much find it right across Canada. It is really an excellent beer. I find it really, really easy to drink. For those people who consider hoppy to be a big negative and you're expecting a lot of bitterness, this is actually a really well presented beer. And it's got some beautiful subtleties to it. It doesn't scream hops. It doesn't scream bitterness. It's got some really nice characteristics to it. Yeah, the grapefruit's really starting to come out now as it's warming up. There's all kinds of different glasses that you can put this beer into. I do like this one because I think it really allows some of the unique characteristics like the pine and the grapefruit and the caramel to blossom. But we'll move on a little bit now. So American Pale Ales are typically more hop forward, which means that it's more likely that you'd be able to get grapefruit, tropical fruits, a little bit of pine, a little bit of what some people might refer to as dank. Sometimes it's got a little bit of mustiness to it, but it definitely is really full citrus forward. Yeah, This is making a good point. Anchor had been around much earlier and resurrected by Fritz Maytag, but I don't think Anchor was really part of the craft beer movement at that time. So back in San Francisco, Anchor had been around for a lot longer, but they're not really considered to be part of the craft beer movement. And I don't know really what the reason behind that is. I think they probably weren't considered to be making craft beer. They were probably making just something really, really easy to drink, which the American beer establishment doesn't view as craft. But I'm with you. I think Anchor is Fritz Maytag did a great job on resurrecting it. Anchor is now owned by Sapporo. And Sapporo bought Maytag, I think about 2 years ago, in order to get better access for all their beers, including Sleeman beers, into the United States. And pretty interesting brewery. I still believe Anchor has, even though we're talking about the others, I still think Anchor has the old traditional fermenting tanks. And we could go on, maybe we'll do a session on Anchor later on, but we have to figure out how that looks. So with American Pale Ales, the bitterness is more subdued than it would be with an IPA. And, we can talk about these things called IBUs. IBUs are international bittering units, and it measures the amount of resins and oils that are left in the beer once it's finished from the hops. And really, the only way that you can measure this is with a very expensive piece of scientific equipment. And so a lot of brewers are talking about IPUs because it's more of this big number that people aspire to, and they want the biggest beer that they can possibly get. The thing with IBUs is it's largely irrelevant in my eyes because it doesn't talk about perceptive bitterness or even realistic bitterness. It's really only a number. And you can balance out IBUs by making the beer have more malt character to it. So what it does is it tones down some of the bitterness. Now, the fascinating thing for me is we see a lot of craft brewers now posting IBUs on their beers. Well, first of all, most of them are guessing because they can't afford that kind of equipment. But the thing that I love is that a brewery like Sierra Nevada doesn't see fit to post IBUs on their beers because they probably view it as largely irrelevant as well. Interesting about Sierra Nevada is they are one of the very few breweries that is using whole hops. Most breweries use pelletized hops. Take hops, pelletize them, grind them so that you can keep them for a much longer period of time. Sierra Nevada is actually using whole flowered hops. They're one of the only breweries that does that, and they continue to do it because they feel that is part of their tradition. So these beers become really, really popular. They're more thirst quenching. They're easier to drink. And they become very, very popular up in Canada. So now we fast forward into the 1980s. In 1986, a brewery starts up in Brampton, Ontario. Starts off by a fellow named Peter Bullitt Jr., who is an immigrant to the country from Yugoslavia or Serbia. And Peter decides that he wants to get into the brewing industry, so starts a brewery up called Great Lakes. And within a few years, Great Lakes decides that it has outgrown its facility in Brampton and moves to the west end of Toronto in Etobicoke on 30 Queen Elizabeth Boulevard, and moves into an old Fabergé plant. Now, I didn't know Peter Sr., but I did meet and have become friends with Peter Jr. He and I met in 2005 when I started my business, and he's a fabulous guy. He's got a wonderful brewery. When I first met them, though, they were only a lager brewery. They were making pale lagers, black lagers, amber lagers, or Vienna lagers. And then gradually, as they started to grow a little bit and more people came in from outside, they started to experiment a little bit. And they created a really fascinating beer called Great Lakes Canuck. So this is Great Lakes Canuck. Now, the inspiration for Great Lakes Canuck is Sierra Nevada, which is kind of cool as far as I'm concerned. So you're taking an idea or concept that was created by one of the most iconic breweries in the United States, and then you're bringing it up here. Now, Canuck has had different versions of it. So the very first one was called Crazy Canuck, after Steve Podborski and all those Ken Reed and all those crazy skiers back in the 70s and 80s. But they've eventually gone away from the crazy because nobody needs that, and they've moved into just calling it Canuck. And they have a great artist that does all their label work, and this is Gordy Levesque, and he is the key iconic Canadian woodsman who we see on top of a log with his axe. He's got his toque on, and his what I fondly refer to as a Rexdale dinner jacket, but everybody calls it something else. So I'm going to pour this beer into this glass. This glass, again, has got a little bit more of a wider mouth open, but the thing I like about this is it's got these beautiful ribbed edges along the bottom. And it's going to, because it's a tighter, narrower base, the carbonation is really going to pop out on here. And with pale ales, we do want a little bit more effervescence because it just makes it that much more thirst quenching. So this is Great Lakes Canuck. You can see that it is a little lighter in color. It's more of a lemon meringue color, and it is hazy. So haziness comes from a lack of filtration or a choice not to filter. The reason you don't filter is you want to leave a little bit more flavor and body in the beer. Great Lakes has gone from being what I consider to be one of the best lager breweries in around 2005 to being absolutely one of the finest IPA and pale ale producers in our country. I think they do a phenomenal job. I'm always amazed at what they do. I've never had a bad Great Lakes beer. It is really in the top 3 or 4 of my brewery choices in Ontario. One is because I've become friends with Peter, but another is They're just really good at what they do. I just love what they do. Craig, it looks a lot closer to what you're drinking. Nickelbrook Naughty Neighbor. Yeah, that's another really great APA, American Pale Ale. That's an excellent one as well. So this one, if you open it and smell it, the hops really jump out forefront, and it is really, really bright pine, bright citrus, lots of that pink grapefruit. You can tell that you're going to drink a beer with some hops in this particular one, whereas with the Sierra Nevada, not so much. It's just very gentle, very soft. Yeah, now that one's a lot different. In our classes, we use the word impact, and impact explains hop bitterness. Only in our Prud'homme program do we use it that way, and the way I position it is impact on a scale of 0 to 10. A 0 would be a very gentle caress, and a 10 would be somebody smacking you in the back of the head hard. So for me, the impact on the Sierra Nevada is somewhere around a 3 or a 4. You can tell there's a bit of bitterness in there, but it's really not unpleasant. Now we get into the Great Lakes Canuck, and the bitterness level for me, the impact goes up to a 5, maybe a 6 on the stretch. It's still really refreshing, very thirst quenching. You've got lots of citrus in the body of it. It's got a very, very quick finish. It's got a little mild, bitter, tannic aftertaste to it. Tannins are the same things as grape skins, walnut skins, where it's a little drying, more like a really long steep tea. Yeah, so much pine. Like, it makes me think like I'm in the middle of a forest. Yeah, it's really nice. It's very it's a lot more bitter. If you have these two back to back, it's a huge eye opener. If you go back to the Sierra Nevada now it's more of that soft, gentle sweetness that's coming out. Another little interesting tidbit, and I know people have heard these things called session beers. So a few years ago, everybody and their brother was making an IPA. And I happened to be down in Chicago for business one time, and I went to a store down there, and I was talking to this guy, and I said, like, how do you sell all these IPAs? And he said, well, so I'll let you in on a little secret. I think everybody's going to be moving over to something that's easier to drink. They love making these IPAs, but you just can't drink as much of it. Chris Arnold, session IPAs, really APAs. You got me, man. That's where I'm going. So anyway, I think a lot of brewers have realized that you do have to sell beer in order to stay in business. And IPAs are nice and they're fun to make, but consumers just can't really drink as much of them. So what they started doing is they started calling their IPAs. They brought the bittering units down in them. They used less hops in them, less intensity, and they started calling them session IPAs. Now the session word goes back to England, where people would go down to the pub for a session with your mates. And a session is just an evening out drinking. But the thing is with the pub is you want to stay there for a long period of time. It's a great place to have a conversation, play darts, rehash, what's going on in the country. And, big ass beers like IPAs, that's not about sticking around for 4 or 5 hours in the pub. That's about having one or two and then, sadly going home or switching to something else. So a session IPA, to Chris's point, is, in my eyes, really an American Pale Ale. Once you drop down after a certain level of IBUs or bitterness, I no longer view it as an IPA. I think there are certain characteristics that make American IPAs, and bitterness is one of them. And so if you're going to drop the bitterness and drop the alcohol content down, that's really an American Pale Ale. So thanks for bringing that up, Chris. That was great. Johnny Canuck, the lumberjack. That's not his name, Vess. His name is Gordy Levesque. All right. I've given you some good stories. I'm having a couple of good beers, moving back and forth between them, trying to figure out what I'm liking tonight. I'll open it up for any questions you might have. And while you're thinking, I will tell you that next week, on the 15th, which is Family Day, I think most of us will still be in our tight little areas that we're residing in. So I am going to do Belgian quadruples next week. I haven't decided exactly which one I'm going to do, but I do have a Zundert 10 here, and I may go venturing out to see what else I can find out there. So I will let everybody know that I'm doing quadruples next week. I'm not going to do two of them and compare them, dealing with an 8-9% ABV beer. We could all go shopping at Harold's place, because Harold probably has more than enough quads for everyone else, because Harold has a wonderful beer cellar that I've heard about before. So you can tell us, Harold, what you're going to be drinking. All right, any wonderful questions that I might be able to answer for you guys? We have to go to Harold's place and get beer now. Looks like we're going to have classes soon for Marisa and Vess. That sounds good. John, what are you asking? Hope we don't lose APAs and IPAs. Not sure it could survive. Most popular beers. Yeah, the reason those beers are all so popular, Bud Light, Coors, and all of them, is they're just so damn easy to drink. They're not meant to have flavor. They're meant to be really, really easy to drink and to drink lots of them. And I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't think we're ever going to lose American Pale Ales or IPAs. I think they're going to become less important. I don't see a lot of American Pale Ales in the marketplace. There are some really good ones out there. Bob Cajun does a really, really nice American Pale Ale. I think it's called Northern Loon. I'm not 100% sure. More Great Lakes history, sure. So I don't think we're going to lose American Pale Ales or IPAs anytime soon. If a can of beer only says Pale Ale, is it an APA? No, not true. I think there are a lot of British producers that put Pale Ales on their beers, and so it could very well be a British Pale Ale. It's part of the confusing thing about beer styles and categorization within our country is we really don't know what it is. I'll give you a good example. There's a red can in the LCBO. It's called Eagle IPA. But it doesn't tell you what kind of IPA it is. It doesn't say that it's a British IPA. It simply only says it's an IPA. And if you're used to drinking Octopus Wants to Fight from Great Lakes or Bone Shaker from Amsterdam, and you have Eagle's IPA, you are going to be massively disappointed because it doesn't have the bitterness. A little bit more about Great Lakes history. Common Loon, that's it, Craig. Thank you. They created their beers back in 1986, moved down to Toronto into that Fabergé plant. Their major beers when I met them originally was Great Lakes Lager, which you really couldn't find at retail. It was really a brand that they were selling a lot at for draft, and a lot of black taps, which is sort of the customized tap of a lot of small and local Etobicoke restaurants. Peter is really has a good vision, has met a few people. Peter's also got some German roots. I think his mother was German, so Peter's got lots of friends back in Germany, and what he tends to do every once in a while is he goes over there and he tours and they find new brewing techniques. So they really have been quite state-of-the-art. They used to have an aging cellar in there that was all based on horizontal fermenting tanks, which is the old way of doing things. They've just converted that over into a cold storage area. They have a state-of-the-art canning system, kegging system. They have one of the most creative set of brewers that I know. They make all kinds of really interesting things, great graphic arts. They're constantly innovating. So if you go to Great Lakes on any given week, you'll probably find 5, 6, 7, 8 new beers. That's because they have a series. What's it called? I think here I have one of them. So they call it their 7 Barrel series, which is their small brewing facility, and they're constantly, they have an innovative brewer there named Nick Perry, who's constantly doing some really, really cool and innovative things. They make great porters. Like I said, pretty much anything that they've done has been phenomenal by my standards. I think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I would classify them as certainly among the top 10 brewers in Ontario from a volume perspective. And they've really grown. Recently, they've just signed a deal to open a brew pub up down near Sugar Beach, so right on Queens Quay, I think, which should be really cool. I'm really excited about that. Have I heard or tried Physics? I got one as a gift at Christmas. Does enhance flavor providing more head. Like Draft, I tried it for a stout. May not be the best to use on an IPA or APA. I have not. I've heard of it briefly, John. I've never tried it. I give you a lot of credit. It's great that somebody gave that to you as a gift. I'm not sure what it's supposed to do. I think whether it does it add CO2 to it? Is it like one of those things? Yeah, they have a whole range. I mean, but we're dealing with the United States, and I think we've discussed this in the past. In the U.S., every once in a while you can see different Sierra Nevada brands up here. Not very often. If you go into Alberta, you certainly can see a lot more, or even British Columbia. But I don't see how we're going to sell more American beer up here, and specifically, with everything that's going on with cross-border shopping and buy Canadian and buy local. I think the emphasis clearly on the LCBO and the small brewers and the Ontario craft brewers is to buy local. And it's nice every once in a while to have something international from the US or from Germany or from the Czech Republic or anywhere around the world. And they augment our system, but I can't see that we would get more of their beers. So I think we're just going to have to stay and get used to eventually at some point going across the border to go get whatever we want. Marie said, did I give you enough about history on GLB? Okay. Then we're right around the time that we normally say goodbye to. So I will say, we do have lots of online programs for those of you who want to know more about beer. You can do it self-directed. You can join in our online program that I'm calling a remote program, and that is you get access to the online classes, and then you get me for tastings for 4 weeks in a row. So those are really successful. I've got about 4 spots open in the March class, and then we're doing another April class in that as well. And then we hopefully will have classroom sessions starting in April in the GTA, and hopefully at some point in Ottawa in June this year. We haven't been in Ottawa for quite a long time. So anybody that loves beer, feel free to tell them about us. We've got lots of good, interesting information that we provide. Will I post for the beer folks? I will. So Anne's reminded me, yes, that I have to tell you what I'm going to be sampling. I think in the next day or so I need to go pay a visit to our friendly LCBOs and see what's going around, and then I'll pick a few up. But like I said, I do have Zundert, which is one of the 12 Trappist breweries in the world. I have one of their quads. There's a few others that you can get. Rochefort 8 and 10 are really good. Chimay has a blue. St. Bernardus Up 12 is wonderful as well. Hello, Fraser. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining. Make sure you like us. Oh, thanks, Mo. You got a whole page of notes. That's great. We'll see. We'll tell Dave we'll see him next week, and I'll look forward to it. We've got lots of things to offer. A whole bunch of things are going to change over the next little while. Thank you, Peter. Always nice to see you guys. So thank you very much for joining us on the Style Sessions. I look forward to seeing you again next week, 8 p.m. Prud'homme YouTube channel. Make sure that you like us, tell other people